For as long as I can remember, I've always been the quiet one, the observer, the listener, the person who sits back and watches life unfold rather than jumping in and taking the spotlight. It wasn't that I didn't have opinions or feelings. I had plenty of those. But somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that my voice didn't matter, that if I spoke up, I would only make things awkward, cause conflict, or risk being rejected. I remember feeling this way even as a child, always hesitant to speak in class or in social situations. As I got older, that fear only intensified. The idea of standing up for myself or confronting someone became a terrifying thought. It wasn't just in big, high-stakes situations where I felt afraid to speak up. It was in the little everyday moments too. When a friend would make a joke at my expense, I'd laugh along nervously, even though it stung. When someone would ask me to do something I didn't want to do, I'd agree without hesitation, afraid to disappoint them. I remember times when people would make decisions for me, and I'd go along with it, even though I didn't like it, just to avoid the discomfort of asserting my own wants. My voice, my opinions, my desires, they all felt like they were buried under a thick layer of fear and insecurity. I lived this way for a long time. I convinced myself that it was easier to keep my thoughts to myself, to avoid conflict, and to just go along with whatever others wanted. It seemed like the safer choice, the choice that would keep me out of trouble, the choice that would ensure I didn't rock the boat. But as time went on, I started to realize something. I was living my life for everyone else. I was letting others dictate my actions, my emotions, and my choices. I was afraid to speak up, not just for the sake of others, but because I had convinced myself that my own voice didn't matter. I began to feel small, invisible, and disconnected from myself, and deep down I knew that this wasn't the life I wanted for myself. It wasn't a single event that made me realize this. It was more of a slow, creeping awareness that grew over time. I would notice the little moments where I held back, where I didn't say what I was really thinking, where I put my needs aside for the sake of others. I'd see friends and family members speak up for themselves, take charge of their own lives, and assert their boundaries with confidence. I admired them, but I couldn't help but wonder why I couldn't do the same. Why was it so difficult for me to express myself? Why was it so hard to speak up for what I wanted and needed? It wasn't just fear of conflict that held me back, it was a deep-seated belief that I wasn't important enough to be heard. I convinced myself that my thoughts and opinions didn't matter, that no one would care if I spoke up. I thought that by remaining silent, I was somehow protecting myself, keeping myself safe from the judgment or rejection of others. But in reality, I was only suppressing myself. I was ignoring my own desires, my own truth, all in the name of keeping the peace. And over time, that silence began to eat away at me. The turning point came when I found myself in a situation where I couldn't hold back anymore. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, but it was a moment that highlighted just how much I had been bottling up. I was at a gathering with friends, and one of them made a joke about something that had always made me uncomfortable. It was one of those jokes that felt like it was meant to be funny, but it hit a little too close to home. Normally, I would have laughed it off just like I always did, but this time something inside me snapped. I realized that I couldn't keep ignoring my own feelings. I couldn't keep letting others speak for me, laugh at my expense, or make decisions about my life without me having a say. I remember the silence that followed after I finally spoke up. It felt like the world had stopped for a moment, and all eyes were on me. My heart was pounding in my chest, my palms were sweating, but I couldn't back down. I took a deep breath and I said, "Actually, that joke isn't funny to me." The room fell quiet. My friend who had made the joke looked taken aback, and for a moment I thought I had made a mistake. I thought maybe I had overreacted, that I had been too harsh. But then something surprising happened. Another friend spoke up and said, "Yeah, I didn't find it funny either." And then another person agreed. It was like a ripple effect. Suddenly, the tension in the room shifted. I had spoken up, and instead of causing conflict, I had given others permission to do the same. In that moment, I realized something that I had never understood before. My voice mattered. It wasn't just about being right or wrong, it was about standing up for myself and owning my truth. Speaking up didn't make me a troublemaker or a burden, it made me human. And for the first time in a long time, I had been afraid to do for years, and the world didn't end. In fact, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. That moment was just the beginning. It was the first time I had actively chosen to speak up for myself, but it wasn't the last. Over the next few months, I began to push myself more and more to express my thoughts and feelings. It wasn't easy at first. There were still moments when I felt the old fear creep in, moments when I second-guessed myself and wondered if I was being too demanding, too outspoken. But with each passing day, I grew stronger. I realized that my voice was my power, and I had every right to use it. I started speaking up in small ways, like telling my family when I needed some space or expressing my preferences when making plans with friends. I stopped saying yes to things I didn't want to do, and I stopped apologizing for taking time for myself. I learned to set boundaries, to say no when something didn't serve me, and to be unapologetic about my needs. It was liberating, but it was also scary. There were times when I still worried about how others would perceive me, but I reminded myself that I wasn't responsible for other people's reactions. I was responsible for my own well-being. The more I practiced speaking up, the more I realized how much I had been holding back all these years. I had kept so many of my true feelings, my desires and my dreams, buried under layers of fear and insecurity, but by speaking up, I was allowing myself to live authentically, to show up as the person I truly was, not the version I thought others wanted me to be. And it felt incredible. It felt like I was finally claiming my space in the world. Of course, there were still moments of doubt. There were times when I hesitated before speaking, wondering if my opinion would be accepted or if it would cause conflict. But with each experience, I became more comfortable with the idea that conflict wasn't always a bad thing. Disagreements were part of life, and they didn't have to mean the end of a relationship or friendship. In fact, I started to realize that speaking up actually strengthened my relationships. When I expressed my needs and boundaries, it allowed others to do the same. It created a space for mutual respect and understanding. One of the most profound lessons I learned through all of this was that speaking up wasn't just about protecting myself, it was also about protecting others. When I spoke up for myself, I gave others permission to do the same. I created an environment where people could be honest about their needs and desires, and that opened the door for deeper, more authentic connections. As I continued to grow in my ability to speak up, I found that I was becoming more confident, more assertive, and more self-assured. I stopped living in fear of judgment or rejection, and I started living for myself. I realized that my voice was powerful, and it had the ability to shape my life in ways I had never imagined. I had spent so many years holding back, but now I was finally free to speak my truth and live authentically. Looking back, I can see how far I've come. I'm no longer the person who sits quietly in the background, afraid to speak up. I'm no longer the person who hides my feelings or suppresses my needs. I am someone who stands tall, who uses my voice to express myself, to set boundaries, and to live the life I want. And I've realized that speaking up is not just a way to protect myself. It's a way to honor myself. It's a way to say, I matter. And that, more than anything else, has been the greatest gift I've given myself.